and warm greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. For those who are unsure, my small island nation is to be found in the South Pacific. Occasionally we get left off world maps, but we're most definitely here. To give you a context for my talk, our population is just over 5 million. Our largest city, Auckland, has been described as one of the most culturally diverse in the world, with over 220 recorded ethnic groups. The indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, are Ngā iwi Māori. Te Reo Māori is one of the official languages of our country, along with New Zealand Sign Language and English. The New Zealand English dialect is distinct and may be hard to follow, so I'll try and speak clearly so that you can understand me. New Zealand was colonised by the British in the 19th century and now is made up of roughly 70% who identify as New Zealand European or New Zealanders, 17% identifying as Māori, 16% from a variety of Asian countries, and 8% who identify as coming from the beautiful tropical Pacific Islands, our close neighbours here in the south. So we're fundamentally a bicultural nation with an increasingly diverse and multicultural population. I live and work as a social work lecturer and researcher in Nelson, here at the top of the South Island, Te Waipounamu. Over recent decades, social workers here have been increasingly concerned that neoliberal and third wave policies have contributed significantly to an increasing fragmentation of the social work task. The roles of social work here are now much narrower than previously conceived and far more controlled by the organisations within which we practice. Alongside this, evidence shows that institutional racism continues to exist in our country's statutory agencies, leading to disproportionately negative outcomes for Māori. In this difficult climate, social work has attempted to respond with innovative and creative frameworks for practice. For example, Māori social workers have continued to develop and expand their practice knowledge and theory, and Māori and iwi-based health and social services are growing and thriving. Cultural and traditional concepts from Te Ao Māori, the worldview of Māori, are widely considered to have given a richness to social work practice. In addition, Pacifica practices based on cultural traditions are proliferating, and Pacifica social workers' voices are now being heard clearly in New Zealand social work literature. Strengths-based approaches have become commonplace, along with a movement away from deficit or dysfunction-based theories and models. Postmodernist, collaborative and international, rather than just Western models and frameworks, have also found a place here in recent years. The PhD study, completed back in 2017, I argued that social pedagogical and social educational philosophy and theory could provide another exciting and complementary body of knowledge for informing social work. Social pedagogy as an identified academic discipline and profession does not exist in Aotearoa, New Zealand at this time. But my hypothesis was that social workers here are undertaking educational roles and tasks regularly and across fields of practice, but without the academic foundations to do so effectively and without acknowledgement and support from our professional and regulatory bodies. I didn't limit my definition of education to a narrow view of formal teaching and learning, as is the norm here, but rather considered it from a social pedagogical perspective, incorporating all aspects of learning for life and taking place in a diverse range of settings. As you can see from the simple graph on this slide, my research showed that education is considered by over 90% of social workers as a key component of our everyday practice, alongside assessment of risks and needs, advocacy, problem solving and protection of at-risk groups. I then operationalised the role of educator through 14 task statements identified from the social pedagogy literature. These statements are listed on this slide next and include aspects such as providing service users with detailed information relating to the issue or situation, explanations about resources, giving opportunities to reflect on life experiences and plan for change, overcoming anxiety and fear, blocking change, and working with service users to develop their own skills and knowledge to successfully deal with life situations. Again, a significant majority of social workers considered all of these tasks important in their everyday practice and confirmed my thinking that we are in fact unrecognised as social educators in our everyday work. Since completing my PhD, I've been advocating for a social pedagogical lens to be applied and acknowledged in our social work. In preparing my presentation for the 2020 conference early last year, I had intended to make this the entire focus of my talk, but since then, the world has changed significantly. In terms of my professional world, we now have an exciting opportunity to embed a social pedagogical approach within the National Social Work degree being developed here for delivery in 2023. I am looking forward to contributing my passion for social pedagogy to this development and really value the opportunity at this conference to learn more from the many talented and knowledgeable speakers. So I thank you for your presentations. The second seismic event in our world has of course been the global COVID pandemic. In rethinking my presentation from my new viewpoint in May 2021, I've become increasingly aware that in the same way social workers here have been using social education principles in their practice without being aware of it, so too our Aotearoa New Zealand government and various communities have been successfully, if unknowingly, employing a social pedagogical approach in their responses to the pandemic. I would like to share and celebrate this application of social pedagogy with you. As you may be aware, Aotearoa New Zealand's response to the pandemic has been considered amongst the best in the world. As I prepare this presentation, we have had under 2,700 cases in total, mostly arrivals from overseas, and just 26 deaths, many of which sadly occurred as COVID arrived on our shores amongst our elderly folk living in retirement homes. As you will also remember, back in January last year, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a public health emergency of international concern under the International Health Regulations. As our Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, has recorded, just a few short days later, on the 2nd of February, New Zealand closed its border to non-citizens travelling from or transiting through China. By the 25th of March, the border was effectively closed to all travellers other than New Zealand citizens and residents, and the whole of New Zealand was in what we called Alert Level 4, or a hard lockdown. At the time, New Zealand had just over 100 COVID-19 cases and no deaths, so this go early, go hard approach surprised many. The key drivers of this decision were the desire to protect people from the virus, prevent our health system being overwhelmed, ensure New Zealand was not a route for the virus to be introduced into the Pacific, and hopefully endure a short, painful hit to the economy and then recover as quickly as possible. The initial intent was to bend the rapidly growing curve of infections so that numbers remained at a level that the healthcare system could cope with. However, it soon became apparent that a swift and timely lockdown, coupled with a requirement for 14 days managed isolation for all overseas returnees from early April, didn't just bend the curve, but crushed it. This became known as our elimination strategy. That is, keeping the virus out of New Zealand, stamping it out. Dr. Bloomfield described the key features of New Zealand's response that have been key to our success to date as including strong, ongoing scientific input, rapid decision-making, including at the political level, Clear and consistent national communication through regular, often daily media briefings, supported by a strong public communications campaign, the rapid scaling up of testing and contact tracing, supported by rapid information and technology developments, an excellent response from an already stretched health sector, and effective border management, including the establishment and ongoing operation of over 30 managed isolation and quarantine facilities. As he says, the complexity of their response is easy to underestimate, as is the relentless and intense challenge of maintaining it. So it's the communication and social engagement strategy that we employed that has interested me most from a social pedagogy perspective. Key principles of social pedagogy have stood out to me in this context. People are always capable of development if they have the resources they need to achieve it. Social pedagogy can thus be seen to have an underlying philosophy which is developmental, adaptive, and fosters growth. Practice is based on visible intervention in people's lives in order to create development, participation, and learning. It's different from other forms of social practice in that it's centred not just on the person and their problems or challenges, but also their social understanding. And it is based on values of integration, cohesion, and cooperation. Judy Melanick, an overseas doctor who now lives in this country, has written, "New Zealand's leadership has won the credit for the life-preserving success of their approach to the pandemic, and they deserve it. As an outsider now, working inside this system though, I believe that there's something to the culture here that has also played a significant role in that success. New Zealand's academic, political and scientific institutions all emphasise communication, empathy and cooperation. Here in New Zealand, we've had only one national lockdown that lasted just 7 weeks. We've had several smaller, localised lockdowns since, but nothing on the scale that other countries and communities have had to endure. And this is how I perceive our response has embodied the principles of social pedagogy. Our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, talked from a shared base of common humanity to the country every day leading up to and during our lockdown. She did this in formal settings, but also on social media, and consistently took an educational, learning and development approach. She also answered questions from everyday New Zealanders from her home each evening after putting her small baby to bed. She consistently emphasised that we did not need to be afraid, that we had an amazing team of scientists leading our response, and that the most important thing we could do was to follow our guidelines and for our team of 5 million to be kind to each other. Each day during our lockdown at 1 p.m, our political leaders, science experts and statistical public health modellers appeared together on our television networks and updated us on the course of the pandemic, keeping us informed of our current status and the reasons for any change in strategies in response to the changing dynamics of the situation. At every briefing, they acknowledged and thanked the people keeping us safe and cared for. The supermarket workers, the carers of the elderly and the vulnerable, the border protection people, the medical teams and social protection agencies. It's fair to say that sitting down at 1 o'clock each day with our families to hear the updates quickly became an integral part of our lockdown experience. A set of alert levels was developed right at the beginning of the pandemic. These were clearly articulated, available in different languages, and have remained consistent over the last year and a half. Scientists, such as our New Zealander of the Year for 2020, Dr. Susie Wild, have appeared regularly on social media, radio and television to explain the evolving scientific understanding of the virus. Again, using easily understood, clear terminology with humour and compassion, never patronising or lecturing, rather informing and guiding. Public messaging was tailored to fit different groups in the community, and tried to use a humorous and fun way to share information and to educate people. This clip of Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, our mild-mannered and quietly spoken Director General of Health, was shown on the big screens at music festivals post-lockdown and as we entered summer, which here begins in December. This was much to our collective delight.
Kia ora koutou. Hello, Aotearoa. I'm Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, and this is COVID-19 announcement. Wash and sanitize hands often. Scan QR codes. Turn Bluetooth on. It's time to make summer unstoppable. Let's unite against COVID-19.
At the same time, iwi-led community responses and education campaigns designed specifically to reflect the values of Māori. A key message from these and Pacific peoples communities was to protect ourselves, to keep each other safe. They embodied the social pedagogical spirit of cohesion, integration, participation and cooperation. So in summary, I believe Aotearoa New Zealand's successful response so far to the global pandemic has been in part due to our leaders and communities exemplifying social pedagogy principles and strategies, even though they have not been recognised as such. This doesn't mean that we've not made mistakes, we've made many, and at times we've been lucky that the consequences have not been much more dire. But our team of 5 million has continued learning, adapting and responding effectively and cohesively overall. In conclusion, I would just like to say that while we're grateful for our South Pacific bubble, we have watched with distress and with horror as our friends, families, whānau and colleagues in many countries have struggled with the impacts of the pandemic. We wish you all the very best in coming months, and we miss you a lot. We can't wait to come and see you all again and for you to pop in and spend some time with us. Nō reira, kua mutu no ihu ngā kōrero mō tēnei wā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.